going to start with a welcome from the university's provost and vice president, Ben Vinson.
Professor Harwood, thank you so much. It is wonderful to see so many of you this morning. Welcome to Case Western Reserve University and to the law school in the George Gund Hall. I see a couple of folks in the audience I'd like to give a special shout out to. I can't see everyone, unfortunately. Dr. Marilyn Mobley, Dennis Harris, others, welcome. I'm so delighted that you're here. I am Provost and Executive Vice President Ben Vinson. I am very pleased to welcome all of you to this incredibly special conversation with one of our most distinguished alums, Attorney Fred Gray. Now, as we all know, the quest to see the fulfillment of the promises of the civil rights era, it still continues. This is readily apparent in a lot of the issues that our country is facing right now. That includes institutional racism, the violation of the rights of refugees and immigrants, police reform, the troubles that exist within our criminal legal system, and the disenfranchisement of people of color in the electoral process. This is just the beginning of the list. We at Case Western Reserve University are tremendously proud of Attorney Gray's lifelong commitment to this work. And we as a university have joined him in this work with our commitment to the challenges that we're facing through our university's vision, something that we call the North Star. In this vision, we are recommitting ourselves as a high-impact research institution that seeks to strengthen our community by leveraging the intersections of humanity, science, and technology with a strong sense of justice and fairness. And we strive to do this by promoting an inclusive community, and that's within our borders as a university and outside of our borders. There is no better home to help us realize our vision for a just and thriving world than our very own Social Justice Institute. Under the leadership of co-directors Aisha Bell Hardaway and Mark Chuck, we are expanding. We are formalizing our Social Justice Institute to be the convener of all activity related to social justice. But for those of you who don't know, for 11 years, this institute has served to engage with our local community, providing the means to educate the next generation of leaders and to conduct research that promotes positive policy change in Greater Cleveland. This institute is superbly positioned to lead our university in furthering our role as a national leader in social justice. But we can't do it without our two leaders. So let me take just a couple of moments to recognize both of them. First is Mark Chuck. Dr. Chuck is an associate professor at the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences, and he also serves as chair of the Concentration in Community Practice for Social Change Network. He's also the founding director of the Community Innovation Network. And his scholarship has focused on bridging differences, encouraging authentic community engagement, and the de-escalating conflict. Now, Professor Aisha Bell Hardaway is an associate professor at the law school, where she also serves as director of the Social Justice Law Center. She has taught as a clinician in the areas of health law, civil litigation, and criminal justice, and her research and scholarship interests include the intersection of race and law, constitutional law, criminal law, policing, and civil litigation. She regularly appears in the national news for her analysis and her insights on police reform and the criminal legal system. So Aisha and Mark, I want to thank you for everything that you do. You have been inspirational to me. I know that you're leading us down a path of greater justice in our community. I have been impressed with how you've taken to these roles, and not just taken to them, but work symbiotically to really elevate an already rich legacy. And with your eyes on your personal work, your personal research, bringing this in as well into the Social Justice Institute, you're really starting to take it to new heights, and I want to thank you deeply for that. Without further ado, who is going to introduce our distinguished guest. Thank you, and Dean Schuff.
Thank you, Provost Vinson. And I'm glad you were able to say a few words about Aisha Hardaway. She is a jewel on our faculty and a rising star nationally. And she is. When she asked me to say a few words to welcome all of you, I jumped at the chance. She said, "Do you need some talking points?" And I said, "Not for this one." I've known Fred Gray for at least the 8 years that I have been the co-dean here. He's been here so often. He was our Centennial Award speaker. He was our graduation speaker. He was the university graduation speaker. We did an entire conference right here in the Moot Courtroom organized by Professor Enton to talk about his work and impact. And we're fortunate that his wife has roots in Cleveland and keeps bringing him back because he is such a special person to our law school and to our legacy. In fact, I would say one of the privileges of being dean is I've met some incredible people, both alums and other speakers who come to our school. And some of them, I mean, we have amazing people like Mohammed Chambas, our alum, who negotiated the end of the Liberian Civil War and the Darfur conflict. And we've had speakers like Ben Ferenz, the Nuremberg prosecutor, the last living one, who prosecuted a crime of 1 million deaths in Nuremberg. And all of those are amazing, but none mean so much to me and are so amazing as Fred Gray. I mean, Fred Gray has had such an impact in civil rights. He was a legislator. He is a leader and an inspiration, and he's got a humble way, but inspiring and courageous way about him. And he inspires so many people. In fact, just this week, his hometown of Montgomery, Alabama, changed the name of Jeff Davis Boulevard, that was named after the Confederate president, to Fred Gray Boulevard. In fact, when I need inspiration, I come down to the Moot Courtroom and I look at his photo on the wall, and I just think of the great things that he did, and it inspires me. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Aisha Hardaway to tell you more about our speaker, but just welcome everybody. You are so lucky to see a piece of history today, and thank you, Fred, for joining us once again.
Thank you, Dean Scharf, and the rest of the law school staff for everything that you did to make today's event a reality. We're delighted, the room's a little crowded, I know it. We're delighted to have with us today the students of promise from multiple area high schools through the leadership and partnership, their partnership with Bob Ivory. Thank you so much for making sure that our students are here in the room. And on behalf of the Social Justice Institute and its other co-director, Mark Chupp, it is our distinct honor to be here with you all today for a conversation with Attorney Fred Gray. And it will be a conversation, and before we get to it, I know there are a lot of 1Ls in the room and a lot of high school students who may not know all of the rich history. I'm not gonna get to all of it, but there are some highlights you must have in your mind's eye before we start today's event. So I wanna say earlier this summer, Mark and I decided that this academic year, and perhaps beyond, would be designated as a time of truth-telling for the Social Justice Institute. At a time when so many politicians, purported leaders, and decision makers are determined to hide the truth about America, both its history and its present, we are fortunate to have with us one of the bold truth-tellers of our time, Attorney Fred Gray. As many of you know, Attorney Gray is a living legend, an icon who has spent the last 67 or more years fighting for civil rights. One of the ugly realities of growing up in the outwardly segregated South was that no law school in Alabama would admit him, a Black person, to study. And so in 1951, he arrived at our law school, not exactly this building, but nonetheless at Western Reserve University, determined to obtain his Juris Doctorate so that he could, in his words, destroy everything segregated that he could find. Fortunately for those of us who value justice, he did not waste any time. Within 2 years of graduating from the law school, a young and determined Fred Gray represented Rosa Parks in the case that sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, and Martin Luther King Jr. in the effort to make racial segregation illegal in Alabama. That initial work led Attorney Gray to his first of 4 cases that would reach the United States Supreme Court. The 1956 case of Gale versus Browder affirmed that Alabama's system of segregated busing violated the 14th Amendment. And just 2 years later, when I get tired, I can't be tired because this man has done amazing work. Just 2 years later, in NAACP versus Alabama ex rel. Patterson, he successfully challenged the state of Alabama's effort to shut down the NAACP through intimidation of violence and death by requiring it to produce its membership rolls. And then 2 years after that, in Gomillion versus Lightfoot, Attorney Gray went on to secure the right to vote for Black Americans by successfully challenging racial gerrymandering in Alabama that would have essentially prevented every Black voter from participating in local elections. New York Times versus Sullivan was the 4th United States Supreme Court connected to Attorney Gray, which I have a vivid memory of Professor Enton teaching me when I was a student here in constitutional law. And that case prevented segregationists from shutting off media coverage of the civil rights movement at a crucial historical moment. Most generally, that decision provides strong First Amendment protection to those who criticize governmental officials and policies. Okay, so I needed my 1Ls to understand this history here. But Attorney Gray's contributions go well beyond his role in those 4 important Supreme Court cases. We note, for example, his integral efforts in ensuring the safety of those seeking to finish the voting rights march from Montgomery to Selma, 57 years ago. The initial march was interrupted by the brutal attack by law enforcement officers on what is now commonly referred to as Bloody Sunday. In the face of that shocking violence, he immediately filed a federal lawsuit and obtained a sweeping court order for then Governor George Wallace to protect peaceful protesters, peaceful marchers from additional violence. They successfully completed the Selma-Montgomery March, and it helped to galvanize support for the Voting Rights Act. One of the most important pieces of legislation in our nation history, and I don't think I'm stretching it by saying that it is definitely under attack right now. In his nearly 7 decades as a lawyer, Fred Gray has represented sit-in demonstrators, freedom riders, and victims of the infamous Tuskegee syphilis experiment. His legal work led to the desegregation of the University of Alabama, Auburn University, and the rest of public higher education system in his home state, as well as the desegregation of public elementary and secondary schools there. And he did all of this, of course, in the face of violence, harassment, and intimidation. And so Mr. Gray has unflinchingly set out to eradicate the ills of segregation, and we consider it a great privilege and honor to lead the institution or to be at the institution where he chose to pursue his legal education. I'm inspired by your work, Attorney Gray. My father was inspired by your work, and so it is a distinct honor to be with you today. We're going to have now a conversation with Attorney Fred Gray, and our Black Law Students Association president, Ms. Iltaf Bala, is going to lead us in that conversation. After she asks Attorney Gray a series of questions, we will open the floor for Q&A from the audience. And as many of you know, there's also a book signing connected to this event. So we have a lot to do in a bit of time. At this point, I would ask you to take the panel stand. Thank you. Lead the way.
everybody.
You can slide in closer, Hilltop. I'm sorry, you're not in the view. So get over.
All right. Are we good now? Okay. Now, hello, everybody. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get right to it just in the interest of time. My first question for you is about law and justice. And how did you, as a lawyer and an agent of the law, navigate conflicts between what's legal and what's just when advising such prominent civil rights activists?
May I, before I answer your question, with all of this that has been taking place and what has been said here today, I would like to take a matter of personal privilege and just make a few little opening remarks and then proceed to answer your question. So if you let me have a personal privilege. And one thing, frequently we don't know how we get here. Bob Iver, young man out there who has a nonprofit here preparing high school students for college and for life, wanted to come down and interview me so that he could encourage young people to go to college and to go to life. And he wrote me, and I thought it was interesting. And I decided I would. He came down. In addition to all this legal work that you heard about, some 20-some years ago, we found that this history that we had been a part of was being lost, and we had a whole generation who knew nothing about hardcore segregation. So we started the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center, also known as the Tuskegee History Center, and that center educates the people on the three ethnic groups in this nation. Contributions made by Native Americans, contributions made by European Americans, and contributions made by African Americans. Then I represented the men in the infamous Tuskegee Syphilis study, as you have heard about. And those men, after we were able to get the president to give or make an apology, they said, "Lawyer, we want you to do one more thing. We want a permanent history in Tuskegee where people will know the contributions we made." And then I found out that the whole history of the civil rights movement, from slavery until the present, we have a whole 3 generations who know nothing about it. So at this museum, we start with slavery, give the people an education on all of that. So in addition to this legal work, for the last 22 years, I have been raising money so that that can be continued. We want my alma mater here, we want this law school here, and we want you to come and visit it, and not only visit it, but have a close working relationship with it and make a contribution toward it. I am so thankful to Professor Inkster over here, Jonathan, who's been with us during the whole time. And you know what he does? Every year he sends a contribution. Having said that, when we were coming up here, my wife Carol, and I want Carol is a native when I was in law school, but we were introduced by a church member at the University Church that's not located not very far from here, right up the street. And after my first wife died, I met her, and this friend of ours thought that we needed to meet. We met, and she wanted the responsibility of taking care of me. And for the last over 20 years now, and she was in business here, satellite cleaners down at 79th and Wade Park. Never been to Alabama before. For the last over of me, and I want to thank you very much. I hope it's your question.
That's okay. I always forgot it too, so it's okay. All right. So my question was how you, as a lawyer, navigated the conflicts between what's legal and what's just when advising prominent civil rights activists.
Well, you know, as you look at, and I understand you're a young person, you weren't a product of the hardcore segregation. And all of our young people were not a product of it. So my involvement, it's a long story. I talked a little bit about it in Bus Ride to Justice, and I'm not going to do that here today. But when I was growing up, and the little history of this involves it, in Montgomery, Alabama, and that community that we talked about, and before we end, I'll probably show you a copy of the newspaper article about the name of the street that they just did this week. But there were only two things a black boy could think about a real profession. And there was to either be a lawyer or a preacher. And I decided to be both. They tell me I baptized cats and dogs. a Church of Christ related school up in Nashville. Somehow my mother, even though my father died when I was 2 and she had only a 6th grade education, got a chance to go up there to learn how to be a preacher. And our pioneer preacher decided that I was pretty good, so I traveled around with him, raising money and recruiting students. After learning a little something about preaching, I went back to Montgomery on the west side of town where I live, and I realized that everything was completely segregated. I realized there was some problem on the buses, that African Americans were being mistreated. And I concluded that in addition to being a preacher, I thought I would be a lawyer because they say lawyers help people, and I thought black people needed help. It was when I was attending Alabama State College for Negroes, what it was called then, now Alabama State University, and its president was one of the speakers at the event on Tuesday, and somewhere before I finish, I'll tell you a little something about it. But I had to use the buses, and I concluded that I was going to finish Alabama State, go to somebody's law school, not apply to the University of Alabama because I knew they wouldn't accept me, finish law school, take the Alabama bar, pass the bar, and destroy everything segregated. So my involvement in it, there was no civil rights movement per se then. The NAACP was the major organization across the nation then that was doing most of the work in it, along with several others. So it was as a result of that. And when I came to this law school, the one thing I had enough sense when I was thinking about becoming a lawyer, I told the people I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't tell them what kind of law. I didn't mention civil rights. I didn't talk about my secret desire to destroy everything segregated I could find. Because I know if I had done that, I don't care how good or how bad my examination would have been for the Alabama State Bar, I would never have passed it. So when I came here, and when Mr. Benson, who was my advisor, said he thought I could make a good lawyer, but I wouldn't be given an opportunity back in Alabama, and he was going to try to introduce me to some black lawyers up here. I thanked him, but told him that I appreciate that, but the only reason I came up here was to go back to Alabama. He said, well, let me tell you one thing. When you go back, don't be afraid to share a fee with a lawyer who have more experience than you. I did that. And as you read Bus Ride to Justice, you will find in all of our early cases, they end up having other lawyers who had experience. And when I was retained by the Montgomery Improvement Association to do the work, I wanted to do it, and I got scared, needed some help, called Thurgood Marshall. He invited me to come to New York. I went up, brought my new copy of a complaint that I hoped to file. He introduced me to Bob Carter. That was my introduction to the NAACP, the Legal Defense Fund, and that gave me an opportunity to grow and develop. Now, I don't know whether I've answered your question or not, but I have told you the facts of it. So if I haven't asked it, and I have a little hearing problem, just shoot it by me again, and I'll try.
I mean, I think you did great regardless. So I'm ready for the next question, if that's okay. And this one is especially on my mind as a law student, and definitely on the minds of a lot of Black law students in the room. So in our classes, we go back and forth about whether the law and courts are able to actually facilitate social change. And I want to know what your rebuttal is to the argument that the courts aren't the time or the place for racial justice conversations.
Well, the courts, in terms of being a lawyer, I recognize the fact that being a lawyer, it's the courts who makes the decisions. And those judges who sit on these benches are supposed to interpret the law as decided by appellate courts and the highest court of the state, and ultimately the highest court in the federal government dealing with federal laws. So I recognize that if we were going to change things, and if we were going to be able to obtain what I wanted to do, and that was to destroy everything segregated I could find, I had to do it through the court system. Now, as the civil rights movement developed, we discovered that there were a lot of other things involved other than just the legal aspect of it. There were people who had to make speeches. There were people who had to encourage others to go. There were just foot soldiers who would be willing to cooperate. There had to be some type of public relations so that the community could get involved in it. So all of these things developed, but my role, as you will find, that unlike some lawyers today, and I'm not criticizing these lawyers, but I elected to kind of stick with the legal aspect. And these laws were so ingrained at that time against African Americans that they needed to be moved. So for Fred Gray, his responsibility was to try to get those laws declared unconstitutional, let other people do the marching, let other people do the public relations, let other people do the interviews with the news media, and I would simply file the lawsuit, try to put together a good legal team so that that legal team could help me do what needed to be done in order to get the job done. And this law school prepared me to do that, for which, Mr. Dean and all of you, I'm truly appreciative.
Thank you so much for that. So that question actually leads really well into another one, so we're going to jump around. Right. So in a time period where the government wouldn't allow Black people to have any sort of rights or power, how did you build power, and how did you and others on your team create and take up space for yourselves and your clients?
Well, you know, courts only decide those issues that are brought before them. And those issues have to initially be initiated by, as all of you know, plaintiffs who filed lawsuits. And those plaintiffs, for the most part, needed to have lawyers who would file those lawsuits to go to court to try to get the laws changed. And that's exactly what we tried to do. And that's why my role was that of sticking to the law. And when I first wrote Bus Ride to Justice, that wasn't the title of it. What I was thinking about was one of the subtitles that is they're changing the system by the system. But the publisher said that's too long. Make that short. Let's do it. Bus Ride to Justice. And since it all kind of was then evolved around the Montgomery bus boycott, that's how it came about.
Right, so this next question is about your approach to storytelling. So you transformed American civil rights with your conviction and your ability to tell a story convincingly. So can you share your approach to storytelling and your lawyering specifically?
What's that now? Say that again?
I'm asking more so about your approach to storytelling in your lawyering and how you use that to transform civil rights.
I'm trying to be sure I'm following you again. Which one of these you interested in? Okay. Okay. I think that's about his approach to the storytelling. Okay. You know, a lot of lawyers' work is convincing people. You have a jury. Well, number one, you've got to convince the court. Because the court determines whether your case can go forward or not. So you've got to be able to convince the court. Then if it's a jury trial, you have at least 12 members or whatever the number of jurors you have that you have to convince. And lawyers have come up with the idea that to be able to tell a story is an easy way to get that message over, particularly to a jury. And of course, it doesn't hurt also. So the matter of storytelling and whatever other devices that lawyers come up with so that they can convince a court and convince a jury is what you do. And over the years, it has developed that they say lawyers need to be good storytellers. I don't know whether I'm a good storyteller or not. Most of my constitutional cases did not involve convincing jurors, but convincing a judge and appellate court judges that this is what the law requires you to do, whether you like it or not, and regardless of whether it is in storytelling form or whether it's by telling them about precedent-setting cases or whatever the facts and the law is, all you want to do is to convince the court or convince the jury, and doing it by using stories and telling a story well is a good way to do it.
Okay, we have time for one more question. And this next one is for myself and other students who are here to do racial justice work. And part of the difficulty in that is maintaining hope that it's actually possible. So were there any moments in your career journey that particularly energized you to keep fighting?
Let me follow you again.
I'm asking if there were any moments in your career specifically that energized you to keep fighting for racial justice, despite how hard it is.
That's a really good question. See, when you get 90, you don't hear as well. I realize, and my whole career has been a little different from some other persons, but I realized that the law was against me when I was going to court. Usually in those early days, I was the only thing black in court. Most of the jurors were white, the judges were white, the court reporters were white, the judge's secretary was white, the stenographer was white. So I realized, and most of those people genuinely believed in segregation. And here I am up there saying that segregation is unconstitutional. So that's against the grain of what they grew up knowing and grew up believing. But I recognize that. But what I always try to do is let them know, say, one, and I don't say to them that this is my personal feeling, but I say to them that what the law says, in effect, that segregation is wrong. So the lawyer on the other hand says just the reverse of that. So all I'm trying to do, judge and jurors, is represent my client and do it in the best possible way I can. I tried to keep myself out of it. I didn't want to get personally involved, because if I get personally involved and tell them my personal feeling, then they get personally involved. The law is supposed to be above all of us. And all I'm doing, Judge and Mr. Jurors and Ms. Jurors, is trying to get you to abide by what the Constitution of the United States and all of the amendments pertaining thereto require you to do as a judge and require you to do as a juror, regardless of what our personal feelings are.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bala and Attorney Fred Gray, for the meat of our conversation. We're going to turn now to the Q&A. And so if you have questions in the room, Samantha Coco is going to come with the microphone. It would be very helpful if you speak loudly and if you speak clearly while asking your questions, and we'll work to make sure that they're heard. There's also questions that may be posed online, so if you would also give a chance for those to be heard, we'll alternate back and forth, just so that you know. Does anyone have questions? We're going to do this until a little bit before 11 o'clock, and then we have some, you'll appreciate this, Attorney Gray, we have some proclamations like we're in church. So we're going to do some proclamations, and then, of course, the book signing.
Attorney Gray, what were some of the issues that you and Dr. King had relative to representing him throughout his career while he was in Montgomery?
Well, because you have to understand, and most of you may not understand, but Dr. King did not come to Montgomery for the purpose of starting the civil rights movement. He came there as pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And he found out after he got there about the serious problems that we were having on the buses, just like I had found out about that when I was a law student. And when the community decided that in addition to the legal aspect, they wanted to get the community involved, then Dr. King became involved in it. So he was simply the spokesman for the people in Montgomery who wanted to solve the problems on the buses. And while solving the problems on the buses was just one step toward solving other major problems that needed to exist. And we were able to get the preachers and the lawyers and the persons on the street and everybody to work together. And we found out, first of all, and it's a good model for us to think about today, and that is we had a problem. We were able to get that problem identified. But we had enough since then, and I'm glad you asked that question. One little group didn't just jump out and decide I'm going to do this, but they saw the problem, they talked about the problem, they came up with a solution, with a plan. The plan was we're going to do it twofold. One, we're going to stay off of the buses until we can, if we can work it within the system to improve things, we thought at least that would give them an opportunity. And that's why we said, have a seating arrangement for our white start in the front, blacks in the back. Whenever it meets, nobody else has to stand. We wanted everybody to be courteous, and that should happen anyway. And then we wanted some black drivers, particularly in black communities. Those were simple. They could have done that within the framework of existing laws. I didn't think it was going to work. I didn't think they were going to accept it because I think the white power structure in Montgomery would say, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. So we won't give anything. And that's basically what happened. But we had a lead back, and that was to file the lawsuit. So all of that working together, and when they refused to do what we demanded, and after Dr. King's home was bombed, the community then was ready to file a lawsuit of Browder versus Gale, which desegregated the buses in Montgomery, and that whole movement was the beginning of what most historians now say was the beginning of the civil rights movement.
Hello, my name is Eric Jeffries, and nice to meet you. I'm impressed with your character and how you are, and I just wanted to know, how was Martin's character as well? Like, how did he really, as a first account, as I heard, I guess, knowing him and seeing him, how did he really present himself, and how did he really get to the point of moving so many people?
Are you saying how did Dr. King defend himself?
No, yeah, exactly that. How was his character?
What was his character like? How did he present himself? How did he present himself? What was his
Oh, Dr. King. Oh, I think most of you, if you have read any of the history about Dr. King, and you didn't have the really privilege of knowing it, but let me just tell you, basically Dr. King was an easygoing person. For example, if you were to walk into a room where Dr. King is, and see him engaged in a conversation, you would never, one, realize that he could move people with words like he could. He would never monopolize a conversation. He would always be listening to others and very respectful for what they said. And he had a sense of humor. He even would make jokes that he wouldn't be able to tell in the pulpit. It was easy for him to get over his points. And it was easy for people to be able to listen to him and to be able to follow his direction. And then when he came in and began, and when violence occurred, he ended up telling us, and he was a father of Gandhi, he wanted us, nonviolence is the right word, because if we're going to get into a shooting battle, African Americans can't win. Because the majority have more emanations than we have, and we have to get them from them. So it's hard for a person when you completely beat on them and knock them down and they just don't do anything. It's difficult for them to just keep on beating you. But if you have some other things working at the same time, the legal aspect, so that a court can say, you can't do that, and if you do it, we're going to put you in jail instead of putting the protesters in.
In your journey, what would you regard as your best day, and what day did you consider to be your worst day? Your best day and your worst day throughout your journey.
My
Best day,
best days, and
Day.
my worst days.
best day in your career and your journey. What was your best day, and what was your worst day?
Let me say this about my cases generally. Let me say this to you.
Your best day. Your best day. The best day you can remember.
Best days.
Write it down. Thank you.
Your best day.
My best day.
And worst. And your worst one.
My best day and my worst one. So, I have never thought about the best and the worst. Number one, every day that the Lord gives me. At 90 years of age, be able still to be within reasonable good mind and can understand some of the things people ask me. That's a good thing. I don't know about bad days. You see all these lawsuits. When I filed them, I expected the initial judge to rule against me. So when they says, I ruled against Red Gray in one of these cases, I didn't consider that as a loss. I considered that as a part of the process. And that there's another judge up there. And frequently, even Judge Johnson, who ruled with us in a lot of our earlier cases, but in the case of St. John Dixon versus Alabama State, he ruled against me. But the appellate court holds and held that students had a right before they are expelled at a state institution to have a hearing. And even they go Million v. Lightfoot, which some people think may be the most precedent-setting cases that I filed. Judge Johnson ruled against me in it and said that the state had a right to change those boundaries. But the Supreme Court unanimously ruled otherwise. So I don't look at them in terms of good days and bad days. I look at it, all of them, as good days headed in the direction of trying to solve a problem that should never have existed. But it did exist, and we have to deal with it the way it is and within the framework of the law as it exists.
Hey, how's it going? My name is Kamari Howard. I'm an 11th grader at Garfield Heights High School. And my question is, can you speak a little bit more about the backlash you received from other lawyers and legal professionals?
You know, what I tried to do was to treat these cases not personally, but I represent a client. And the other lawyer, just like the other lawyer, represents the client. So if you keep yourself out of it and don't get personally involved, you're on the right direction. I didn't expect the lawyers on the other side to agree with me. Just like in a personal injury case, you represent the plaintiff, they represent the defendant. However, you do expect them to be respectful. And when you don't get yourself personally involved in it, you're in a much better position. I always tried when I went to a court to be well prepared so that the judge would have no reason to question what I was saying. He may not agree with me, but he may say that you have a good argument, and that may be true on the other side. So however, there have been times, and that's why if you keep these things not on a personal basis, you'll be able to do a much better job with it. Jack Crenshaw, who was the lawyer for the Montgomery City line in Montgomery, who was probably the one who kept the city and the bus line from agreeing on our little proposal, which may have been able to have stopped the bus boycott, but he was very, very adamant and said you can't do it under existing law. I didn't agree with it, but you know what? Now that was back in 1955, 56. Years later, in 1974, 73, 74, when I was representing the men in the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study, and when we had filed the case, and we had reached a settlement in the case, and when the court ended up saying I was entitled to a fee that I didn't know I would get in the first place, I needed some lawyers who would testify as to the reasonableness of a fee. And guess, every time I would ask somebody about who I should contact, guess what they told me? Contact Jack Crenshaw. Jack Crenshaw was the same lawyer for the bus company that I had ended up beating. And you know what? When I called Jack, in the next few minutes he called me back. I told him what I wanted. He said, Fred, send me a copy of your petition, and I think I can support it. And he did support it.
What advancements to legal education and community organizing would you suggest as mechanisms in pushing the culture forward?
Yeah, show it to him.
Show it to him, Sam. Show it to him.
This question is, what advancements to legal education and community organization would you suggest as a mechanism in pushing the culture forward? Now, when you talk about culture, I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. Let me tell you, I think that we still have two major problems in this country with respect to discrimination and racism. I think the two problems are, one, we have a problem of inequality. We have a problem of inequality, and we have a problem of equal justice. We don't have equal justice. We don't have equality, and we still have racism, and we still have inequality. Those are it. Racism is still here. If you look at most of the problems we have and look behind them, you will see that racism is still there. If you look at it in terms of equality, racially, you'll find it's still there. If you go back to about 1608, when slavery started, you'll find what? You had what? Racism, and you had what? Inequality. What we have been doing from that time until now is chipping away at racism and inequality, and this country has never really faced it. And that's why I say about the problem today. One, we need to face up to the problem that racism and inequality is wrong. Come on. It needs to start at the White House. It needs to be in the Congress. It needs to be in the Supreme Court. It needs to be at the in the heads of our educational institutions, of our CEOs. If it starts at the top, then the little guy at the bottom will feel comfortable in doing it. But to just say it's wrong and do nothing is wrong. It won't happen. So after you declare it, then you need to come up too with a plan. If Joanne Robinson and I had not sat in her living room on December the 1st and December 2nd of 1955 and planned the Montgomery bus boycott, it would not have occurred on December 5th. It may have occurred some other time. But we got to work right then, and neither one of us wanted people to know that we were doing it. So we wanted to plant the seed so that somebody else could make the motion and see that it took place. So you have to have a plan. We made the plans, we sowed the seed, then we sat back and watched other people make motions, and some of those people who made the motion, like to have Dr. King this and somebody that, they don't know where it came from. Yeah. But they made it, and they got credit for it, and that was good. But after you have a plan, if you don't what? Execute it, it's no good. So you have to have people. That's why it was important to get people involved. So if you are interested in solving these problems, if you can look at the pattern that we used at the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott, it may be able to help you solve the problems. We didn't have all the electronic things that we have now. And I can't sit here and tell you what organization you ought to be connected with. I can't sit here and even tell you how to do it. Nobody told me how to do it. Nobody told me to decide to become a lawyer and destroy everything segregated I could find. But I had enough sense to do something for myself and then make plans. Then get some help. You can't do it by yourself. You can't get up there alone and implement the plan. And then what each one of us, we sit here now and we talk about what I can do and what I'm doing. We really are saying you want somebody else to do it. But each one of us is going to have to be a part of helping to solve the problem because it is so ingrained in this nation. And this nation has never faced up to racism and doing away with it and doing away with inequality. This is a good place, and this is what I say about all these speeches I made. I probably said it when Bob was down there, and I said it Tuesday when they named and while I'm at it, I just want to show you, this is a copy of the Montgomery Advertiser. Shows my wife and me and Mayor Reed, and the name change. We had 2 events on that day. They honored me, and they also honored Claudette Carvin, who was my first civil rights case. She filed a motion to try to get her record expunged. So all of that is good. And the good part about it, we need you, and I can't underestimate. We need your support for the Tuskegee History Zone.
This is the last question.
Thank you, Attorney Gray. I want you to talk a little bit today about the voting rights and how it's being attacked throughout every state, seems like, in America.
Okay, I don't think you need me to tell you about how it's being attacked. I think the media has told us that. And even states that you would normally think would not be, you wouldn't expect to be against any person who's qualified being able to vote. But I think what it shows is that there is still racism and inequality in this nation. And there are some people who, because African Americans sometimes have been able to come together and vote and elect candidates to office that someone else may not think should have gone in, then they get against them for exercising that right. But voting rights has always been a key issue. And African Americans have always, since slavery, been denied that right. And we'll just have to continue to work for it.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us in person and online. We have an overflow crowd here, which I'm really happy to see. It's standing room only here for those of you who are online, and we also have an overflow room, so thank everyone for coming. My name is Janice Seaman Williams. I'm the Director of Outreach Programs for the Focus Group in the Division of Student Affairs, and it is my pleasure to present some of the proclamations. I will just, yes.
A little bit of technical difficulty. For the CLE, people who are online for the 1 hour CLE, I need to announce the CLE code. I'm sorry, I forgot to do this. And my eyes. It's 456789. Again, for those of you online for CLE, 456789.
Thank you, Professor Hardaway. We know that we have proclamations coming from the city of Cleveland and from Cuyahoga County Council. So Attorney Gray, you will receive those. But it's my pleasure to introduce Bob Ivory, who is representing the Brotherhood of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity.
Thank you, Janice, and good morning, everyone. I had a burning question as I sat, and it was to Attorney Gray. I wanted to ask, when you were at Alabama State University, did you, by chance, have a choice in fraternal organizations? Oh, okay. That was my burning question, in which I knew the answer. Attorney Gray, on behalf of the Zeta Omega chapter of Cleveland, the graduate chapter, I have the privilege of not only welcoming you to the 4th District through the Brotherhood of Omega Psi Phi, in which I've been a member for a short 4 years. However, in meeting you in Tuskegee, in engaging you and welcoming us into your home where we interviewed you, I firsthand experienced the epitome of manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift through you, and I thank you. So we have a proclamation that the Brotherhood, Brother Ben Holbert is not here yet. He was actually going to present this, but I have the privilege of thanking you for your career and service and the representation, and not only being a friend, which is essential to the soul of Omega Psi Phi, but a friend to justice, rights of the United States of America and those of color. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vera Perkins Hughes, President of the African American Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve University.
Good morning, everyone. Attorney Gray, it's been a great privilege to be here with you today and to see you. The only name I can throw out to you is Hosea Williams. I had the opportunity to work for him in 1973 and 74 and see what good work everybody had done with SCLC. So today, hearing you and putting together some thoughts in my mind, I just want to honor you and tell you you're one of the sharpest dressing 90-year-old. So on behalf of the African American Alumni Association here at Case Western Reserve University, we are honored to pen a resolution of achievement and recognize you this day, October 29th, 2021.
We received a certificate of commendation from United States Senator Sherrod Brown, who represents this district, and he sent it poster sized, which means you can hang it on your wall. So I won't present it to you today, but we'll present it to you at another time, especially so that we can frame it. So certificate of commendation presented to Mr. Fred Gray. Please allow me to join your family and friends in extending my sincere gratitude to you for your untiring efforts to protect the rights of African Americans. Your brilliant work as a lawyer in defending the rights of African Americans has paved the way for others to continue your mission. Your dedication and sincerity have inspired countless others to fight for equality and desegregation. Your work has served to strengthen and enrich our community and the state of Ohio as a whole. I thank you for your service and wish you all the best for the future. Sincerely, Sherrod Brown, United States Senator, October 29th, 2021. So most of you all know that at the center of our work is social justice. And this entire endeavor speaks to that power and to the power of partnership. The lead partners for this event are the Social Justice Institute, Focus Outreach Programs, and the Students of Promise. And the three of us have been connected for a long time in this work. And so when Bob Ivory called here and said, can we create an opportunity? We said, yes, we can, and yes, we will. There is no way that we could have done this in such a short window without the support of a whole bunch of people, organizations, departments, schools, and organizations that are community-based and campus-based. So I want to give some special thanks to Dean Scharf, thank you, and Eric Seiler, who has really helped us to coordinate this day. Can we give them some applause? And I want to thank all of the students, faculty, and staff at the School of Law at Case Western Reserve University for welcoming us into this space. I want to say thank you to the Office of the Provost and President, the Alumni Association, especially Shammy Williams, who helped us a lot with our coordination, the African American Alumni Association, Vera Hughes, President, and Linda Wheat, Communications Chair, BALSA, which is Black Law Students Association, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity, Alabama State University, especially the help that we had even long distance from Dr. Darren Moten, who is the chair of the History Department, and Jocelyn Travis, who is the president of the Cleveland Alumni Association of Alabama State University, but right now she lives in Birmingham. Barnes & Noble Bookstore, who has assisted us with our book sale. OIDIO, the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, Robert Solomon, Vice President. And is Michael Bustamante here? I know that he was scheduled to attend. The Emerging Scholars Program, which is coordinated by Dr. Stephen Hainsworth and Arthur Evanchek, who have given us the students who will eat lunch with and have a conversation about college life with our wonderful high school students that are here. the Office of Undergraduate Admissions, Rod Lindbim and John Patrick O'Hagan, who will provide our student ambassadors so that these young people can receive a campus tour. If there are any elected officials here or community leaders, we appreciate your support. And I would like for all of the alumni in the room from Alabama State University, if you could stand. Please remain standing. If all of the law school alumni from Case Western Reserve University and all of the current students, please stand. And all of the alumni from Case Western Reserve University, please stand. So, Attorney Gray, I wanted you to see this. I wanted you to see just how much love and respect and appreciation there is for your lifelong commitment to justice. We know you have been on this battlefield for your entire lifetime, and it is because of your commitment, your work, your dedication that we can stand here and say that we are alumni from Alabama State, which is where your higher education journey began, and from Case Western Reserve University, which is where your law school journey began and successfully completed. And I say this as a daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter of Alabama people. And those of us in Cleveland know that there are thousands of us who were raised being known that Cleveland is Alabama North. And that is true to this day. So we know that there is order in the universe. So we know that there is a reason that you came from Montgomery to Cleveland. It was not by happenstance. You were meant to be here. And for that, we are eternally grateful. And I want to say thank you to your family for sharing you with us for an entire lifetime. And we are so proud and pleased that we are members of your family and that your work continues to bless us. I'm glad I'm a witness. I'm gonna ask Aisha Hardaway to come up here and close us out.
You all have, the Students of Promise are going to be eating, and I trust that we have direction for the Students of Promise to get to Bell Commons for their meal. And then those of you who have purchased, I know I saw people in line purchasing books already. If you want to have your book signed, we're going to have Attorney Gray set up and prepared to sign books. All I ask is that we allow him to come out of the room. So if you want your book signed, go to the table where he is going to come and then stand there as opposed to crowding him in here. Thank you.